time for another episode of The Break. I'm Father Roderick, and I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be elsewhere, and yet here I am sitting in front of my microphone recording this week's show. I'll explain in a minute what's going on. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So yeah, I'm not supposed to be here. Actually, I am supposed to be sitting on a couch, completely exhausted after a second day of walking 40 kilometers, probably trying to heal the blisters or treat the blisters on my feet, and dreading the 2 subsequent days, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, where I would also have to walk 40 kilometers each day. However, I'm not doing that this year. And the reason is that I have a foot injury. I did register for this big 4-day walking event. Many of my friends are walking. I miss them dearly. But last weekend, I decided that it wouldn't be wise to participate, because every time I walked more than, let's say, 10 kilometers, my feet would start to hurt so much that I just couldn't walk anymore. And I didn't want to jeopardize my health and maybe risk a more severe injury by just pushing myself. Or maybe what I sometimes hear from other people, they will just take painkillers to be able to finish that big walk. I would have loved to participate, but I always have to remind myself, I'm doing this kind of stuff to get healthy, not to get injured. And so that is why I am at home right now. Normally I would stay in the city where the walking event is organized. I usually stay with a Jesuit priest that I've gotten to know over the years, with a few other people that also participate in that walk of the world. It's usually a really great time, because most of the day for like 8 or 10 hours you're walking, and then when we all get back home, we organize a barbecue, we cook together. We talk about a lot of things. It's always a very fun week. But now I'm sitting here at home. I've got an extra week. I didn't plan anything, so my calendar is pretty empty, which means I have a lot of extra time to be creative and to also just rest a little bit. And I've been reading a lot. I'm finally catching up on my Goodreads reading list. I've been playing more video games than normal, and when I'm done recording this show, it is time for movie night. So I'm recording this on a Wednesday evening, and in my calendar, I've marked that Wednesday evening is my movie night. I usually watch a television series and some anime, but a lot of that activity is still linked to my videos and my podcasts. But I rarely take the time to watch an entire movie. And so I decided at least once a week, I will watch a movie. And Wednesday is just a perfect day. It's like halfway through the week, so it's something to look forward to. And it can be either a movie on one of the streaming platforms. I'll talk a little bit more about the whole crisis when it comes to streaming platforms later on in this show. Or I may actually go to the movies, to the cinema. I haven't seen the Indiana Jones movie yet. This is also because, despite the fact that it's summer holiday for most people, for me this is a time where I have so much other stuff that I want to do, and I'm not in a hurry to see Indiana Jones. I think for many people, it's kind of similar, especially if you live in one of those countries in the world where it's super hot right now. I don't know about you, but maybe just for the air conditioning, people would go to the movies. But otherwise, I think, with this kind of weather, you don't sleep enough and you're tired. And I don't think this is a good time to launch movies. Speaking of movies, maybe it's time to talk about them.
How do you not like movies?
They're predictable. Like, the guy gets the girl and that kid sees dead people and Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Not liking movies is like not liking puppies.
They're fine. I just get bored and never make it to the end.
You need a movie education. You need a movication. I'm gonna give it to you.
Now, Indiana Jones is not the only big box office movie currently in theaters. This week also saw the joint premiere of two movies that couldn't be more different from one another. It's the Barbie movie on the one hand, and it's the Oppenheimer movie on the other hand. Barbie is a quirky story. I haven't seen it yet, but some of my patrons have seen it. They say it's a really fun story about Barbie who starts to realize the truth about her life, and then she turns her life around. It's fun. It's really very much inspired by the world of the Kenner toys. And then on the other hand, you've got Oppenheimer, which is of course about the guy who developed the first atomic bomb and the extremely dark consequences of that for mankind, not just in light of the events around World War II, but of course the legacy is still this nuclear arms race that has threatened, I think, our world for ever since, and who knows what the consequences might be in the future. So, and then there's also the new Mission Impossible movie, very much in the vein of what I loved about James Bond and similar movies. I think Vin Diesel at one point, didn't he have that XXX series where all these movies are a bit the same? There's the hero, very classic movie hero, and then it's filled with chases and spy activities and heists and whatnot. And Mission Impossible, based on an original television series, I think from the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. I've never seen it, but I did love the first few Mission Impossible movies that came out. I remember seeing the first one. Maybe I was in Rome at the time. It's such an iconic movie with Tom Cruise, hanging from the ceiling, trying to break into that computer. It's that movie set such a standard for this kind of for these kind of stories, and then they just kept going and going and going. What I remember from the first movie was that I totally didn't understand what was going on. James Bond can be a bit all over the place sometimes story-wise, but especially these first 2-3 movies, they had like everyone was wearing these masks, and so you could never tell if it's a little bit what Marvel is doing right now with Secret Invasion, where you don't know who's a Skrull or not. Anyone can be someone else, and it's super confusing. And in Mission Impossible, they just totally went overboard with all the masks, and so I left that movie theater completely confused, and I don't think even now that I totally understand what went on. But it didn't really matter because there was a lot of action. The stunt work was amazing. Later on, the special effects got better, and of course, Tom Cruise is known for doing a lot of the stunts that you see for real. And so if you see him flying, a fighter jet, it's not CGI. He's really flying that plane. When he's jumping off a cliff on a motorbike, it's not a stunt man. They don't do face replacements. Actually, Tom Cruise himself who performs the stunt. And I think they use that element for promotional purposes, of course, because now everybody knows in advance that, we're not being tricked. And that's kind of the problem, I think, with a lot of action movies. You never really get engaged because you feel like, well, you know what? It's safe. They have stunt people for this, or it's CGI. It's all fake, But in advance that, no, this is the real thing that we're seeing. And I think that if they wouldn't publicize this fact that Tom Cruise does a lot of his stunts himself, I don't think the movie would have the same impact. It would still be probably a very entertaining movie, but it wouldn't have that visceral reality feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I just saw. And that is really Tom Cruise hanging on to that plane. So I've missed a couple of Mission Impossible movies, and I'm currently catching up on streaming. So I've been watching 2 out of the 3 movies that are already online. So I watched Ghost Protocol, which I felt was one of the weakest in the series. It's a very weird story. I think it starts in Russia, and then it moves to Abu Dhabi, I think, and then he climbs that big skyscraper. But it's every time such a suspension of disbelief, like there's no way that is possible, or how convenient this and how convenient that, and it's so it's almost like a parody of itself. And I think I felt they went overboard in that movie. And so I kind of disconnected. I didn't like it. What I totally forgot, by the way, was that Jeremy Renner was in that movie. Of course, Hawkeye, who later on, rose to fame with the Hawkeye series for Marvel, but he is an integral part of the Mission Impossible group. I think he was introduced in that movie Ghost Protocol, and then he just remained for the rest of the ride. I'm currently watching Rogue Nation. I watched half of the movie. That one is a lot better than Ghost Protocol. And then I still have to see Fallout, which according to many fans of the series is the best so far. I don't know about the current movie in theaters. Some of you have already seen it, and it's part one. So they actually did two parts. I guess they just filmed it probably at the same time to save costs, but they will release it separately. So that's a smart way to save some money. And apparently it's also very, very good. I always wonder how long Tom Cruise is going to do this. He's 60 now. Yeah. Well, on the other hand, that's just 5 years older than I am. So, but on the other hand, I am not climbing skyscrapers and jumping off cliffs on motorbikes. So, yeah, I don't know how he does it. Today also saw the world premiere of the trailer for season 2 of the Wheel of Time series. That's an adaptation, of course, of the famous books by Robert Jordan. I've read 4 of them, and so this second season is going to cover, I think, book 3 and 4, and also part of book 2. They kind of mix it around a little bit in the adaptation, and the television series in many ways is different, sometimes more condensed. They take a lot of creative liberty to bring this huge epos to the small screen, but I think they probably did the right thing with that, because the story is so immense. I mean, there are thousands of characters in these books, so they had to kind of make it a little bit simpler and also sometimes combine certain characters. I think they did a pretty good job. You can tell, however, in season 1 that it lacks the scale of, let's say, Rings of Power, which is also an Amazon Prime production. But Amazon really wanted for the Rings of Power television, I'm calling it movies, but they wanted that series to feel like the original Lord of the Rings movies. And so the scope is much bigger. I think the budget is probably also tenfold of what they can spend on Wheel of Time. But the original story of Wheel of Time is, of course, just as epic as what Tolkien did with The Lord of the Rings. It's a different type, slightly different genre, but the scale of the world building is very similar to what Tolkien did with Middle-earth. However, the television series, given the constraints of the budget, and also given the fact that this was filmed entirely during COVID, at least the first season, I think that probably also part of the second season was filmed under COVID conditions. And so it all feels more kind of like a standard fantasy television series. So I'm still looking forward to the second season, especially because it is so different from the books. And having read the first 4 books, I'm really looking forward to rediscovering the story, but then through a different angle. I always like it when they don't play it safe, following the books to the letter, but there's still something to discover in the adaptation, even for people that have read the books multiple times. I haven't seen the trailer yet. I'll probably do a reaction trailer one of these days on YouTube. But I also want to move on to a review of this week's episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. You know how much I love Strange New Worlds. It is the best Star Trek series in decades. Actually, right now, it's my favorite Star Trek series ever. Even more than Deep Space Nine. I know that maybe that's sacrilegious to say, but Deep Space Nine, story-wise, is probably much more ambitious than what they do with Strange New Worlds. But it's very dated, and it has a lot of clunker episodes. And so even though I enjoy watching it, but there are many episodes where I'm like, yeah, it's really kind kind of classic Star Trek TV. It feels cheap, it feels simple, and the writing is great. Ronald D. Moore was involved, especially in the later season, so don't get me wrong there. But quality-wise, the acting, the whole execution of Strange New Worlds is beyond anything I've seen in the Star Trek universe. And what I love most is that the chemistry of the crew members is near perfect. I mean, I can't wish for a better family vibe than what they do with this crew of the Enterprise. And so this past week, they also kind of switch up the genre. Some episodes will feel almost like horror, and some of them are like classic time travel story or a romance. And this week, it was comedy. It was golden comedy. I've never laughed this much during any Star Trek episode ever. This episode tells the story. I won't spoil it, but to give you an idea, Spock, of course, is not just pure Vulcan. He behaves very much like a Vulcan because he learned how to control his emotions, but his mom is human. And so there's always this duality in him. And there is his human side that he tries to repress because he really wants to be a Vulcan, but it's very hard. So in a similar way, his aspiration to be a Vulcan is similar to what you see in Data later on, who really wants to be a human, but still is constantly kind of fighting the android in himself, and it's just really not grasping what it means to be fully human. Here, Spock is faced with the same struggle. He is Vulcan, but he also is human. And how do you reconcile these two parts of your identity? And I think that's why we relate so much to him. Well, in this particular episode, because of something that happens, for a certain time, Spock becomes fully human, including his ears. No more pointy ears. He just has round ears. His hair is different, and his eyebrows are human eyebrows. And it comes at the worst time possible because he is supposed to have an encounter with the family of his fiancée. And that encounter is crucial in the whole process. If he messes it up, if he doesn't follow all the minutiae of the Vulcan liturgy, then he's going to be cast out. And so right in that moment, he is unable to channel his inner Vulcan because it's gone, it's eradicated. So you'll have to watch the episode to see how come and how it all resolves itself. But the writing was so incredibly well done, and the acting was super funny. It had heart. I also really loved Captain Pike's role in this. Like, he's constantly in the background, like raising an eyebrow. He's like, uh-oh, and he's trying to help, but it's like half of the comedy comes from how he reacts to the situation that Spock finds himself in. It was maybe my favorite episode so far. It's so, oh my gosh, I love this series. All right, that's enough for starters. Let's talk about something that is also in the realm of sci-fi, and it, for me, is the biggest news that just broke this day, the day that I'm recording this episode. And it came from none other than Mike Straczynski himself. Michael Straczynski, of course, the writer and creator of Babylon 5, and also of many other famous series. He's also been a writer for a number of comic book series, both in the Marvel and in the DC universe. It's a writer that I admire so much. I've read his autobiography, Becoming Superman, which is insanely good. And his writing is unparalleled. I think he's my favorite science fiction writer. And Babylon 5 is his most famous series. I discovered it because I started watching Deep Space Nine, and then some of you told me, well, did you know that the story of Deep Space Nine is inspired by what Babylon 5 did? And if you watch the two series together, which I am still doing because I haven't finished watching Babylon 5, nor have I finished watching Deep Space Nine, the further you go, the more you see the similarities. It's almost as if, Deep Space Nine was copying all the big reveals in Babylon 5. However, Star Trek is Star Trek, Babylon 5 is Babylon 5. What Straczynski did was to create a very coherent science fiction world, and what made that series so incredibly special and unique was that he conceived of the entire story before they even started casting. He knew exactly what would happen. And so it's an epic story that is told over multiple seasons. And every season has a lot of episodes. This was still in the time that a season wouldn't be 6 or 8 episodes like most series we watch on streaming media nowadays. No, they would have like 24 episodes. So it's a ton of work to get through that story. But because he did all the planning beforehand, and he even reveals in his audio commentaries that not only did he have the story the way it was ultimately filmed, but he also had B stories, like contingency stories. If for whatever reason an actor wouldn't be able to continue, there are always things that happen when you're embarking on a big multi-year project like that can go wrong. But he had planned for everything. So it wouldn't be a problem if and this actually happened with the original captain of the actor who played the original captain, or what is it? It's not the president, but the guy in charge of the Babylon 5 diplomatic station. That actor got all sorts of health problems. And so he had to bow out. They brought him back, I think, for the final few episodes, but he had to be replaced by someone new. But that was all taken care of. That he had that option was open. Nobody was irreplaceable. And so it makes for unique storytelling. What kind of works to the detriment of the longevity of Babylon 5 is the fact that this was created kind of on the tipping point between old-fashioned special effects work and digital special effects work. Nowadays, of course, everything is digital, and there's even now more of a return to practical. A lot of current movies and even TV shows are trying to do more in camera because our minds are so good at discerning whether something is real or whether something is computer generated. And so, for instance, in Andor, almost everything you see is practical. There are only a few establishing shots that may have used some computer work, but most of what you see is practical. But when Babylon 5 was entering production, they started to experiment with rendering what normally would be very expensive special effects shots, especially with model work, spaceships, and in order to save costs and to make it even possible to visualize some of the stuff in the scripts, they used computers. In fact, a lot of the special effects were rendered on, back then, what was considered to be just a consumer type of computer. I think they used the Amiga to render a lot of those graphics. They also rendered them for the 4:3 ratio, which at the time was the norm. There were no widescreen TVs. It's hard to believe, but like the Next Generation in Star Wars, everything was filmed for 4:3. And so the special effects were only rendered in 4:3, and they were only rendered for television quality. This is also because those computers were super slow. And in order to be able to render things in time, all these special effects were rendered at a very low resolution, which looked fine at the televisions at the time. But nowadays, even if you try to scale them up, they look so fake. And so, the colors are garish, and it's so jarring compared to the rest of the footage, because the rest of the show was filmed still on celluloid. This was before the advent of digital cameras. And so you have this weird combination of really pristine looking, kind of old-fashioned film-based footage and these very primitive totally outdated special effects. This is one of the reasons that the series Babylon 5 was never released on Blu-ray, because the masters, of course, of the film stuff, they could be re-rendered, and I think they've been rescanned in high resolution, but they couldn't do anything with those special effects. In fact, they actually filmed Babylon 5 in 16:9 in widescreen. And just like they did with the early seasons of The X-Files, which have been re-released in widescreen because they were filmed originally in widescreen. This is also the case for Babylon 5. But because all the special effects only exist in very low resolution 4:3 format, the only way in which you could do a widescreen high definition release of Babylon 5 would be if you would totally redo all the special effects. So we're talking about, 9, 10 seasons? 24 seasons, 24 episodes per season, something like that. The costs would be astronomical. And especially for an old series, this series is 20 years old, there's just no market for that. And unless in the future, maybe with AI assisted re-rendering or like recreation, which I can totally see happening one day, that you can just tell a computer, hey, give me a shot like this, but then totally redo it in high resolution. I think we're getting there, but that technology is, of course, still in its infancy right now. But until that moment, it is impossible to do anything more than upscaling the special effects that we have right now, and then just issuing this in a 4:3 format. And so for a very long time, I remember even asking this directly on social media to Michael Straczynski, because he's very active on social media, especially on Facebook, and he's also very responsive. He always talks with his fans, which to me is like, oh my gosh, I got a reply from Straczynski himself. I was so over the moon. And I asked him, do you think we'll ever see this on Blu-ray? And at the time, this is a couple of years ago, he said, no. And he explained the whole situation. It's like, we just don't have, the quality is not there in the source material. And if you would upscale everything to Blu-ray quality, the disconnect between what was filmed with real film and what was rendered on these primitive computers would be too big. So I don't think we're ever going to see this. And lo and behold, today it was announced that we will get to see a Blu-ray release. The entire series, the complete series, is going to have a Blu-ray release in December, actually on December the 5th, which is the eve of the feast of St. Nicholas. And in the Netherlands, we ask presents to St. Nicholas. So I know what's going to be on my list. I'm going to be so nice and not naughty at all, because really, I'm so curious. And this render, or this version of Babylon 5, will be based on an HD upscale that they did for streaming platforms a few years ago. And according to, I've never seen that particular version because it's not available on streaming platforms here in Europe, but apparently it's not too shabby. Yes, the special effects look a little bit clunky. They have been upscaled, but all in all, it does work. And they also did some slight work on color correction and contrast and that sort of stuff. So there is definitely some work has been done to make this acceptable in HD. And it's that version that they're now going to release on Blu-ray. Of course, the bitrate of Blu-ray discs is way higher than you would get on a streaming platform. So Straczynski himself said that probably this is the best version that we've ever seen. He is not involved in all this, by the way. He created the series. He was there for every episode, and yet this is something that takes place completely, behind his back to a certain extent. They haven't been, and this is what's wrong, I think, with today's television industry. These big companies, they treat their digital property or their intellectual property as a commodity, as a business, and they don't care that much about the creators. This is also the core, I think, of the problem that led to the writer's strike and the actor's strike right now. It's because all these creative people that work so hard to make these stories and to bring them to us as an audience, after they've done the job, they're discarded. It's almost like, maybe it's the wrong metaphor, but you have these donor fathers, that they will, like, certain people want to have children and they will just rent a dad to a certain extent, and then after the man has done his part of the equation, he's no longer necessary and he's not supposed to be a father. And that is kind of what we see happening right now. When what I told you last week, when they want to actually be able to scan people's faces and then use their likeness for eternity without giving any residuals to the original actor. They want to be able to use artificial intelligence to recreate voices and later on even performances of actors, even after they died. And nor the actors themselves, nor their family would have any control over that. I know that they actually already do this. Remember when we heard the voice of Darth Vader in the Obi-Wan Kenobi television series? That famous voice by James Earl Jones was completely computer generated. James Earl Jones did no work for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maybe he got paid, but I remember reading somewhere that he actually waived his rights. He sold his voice, or at least the likeness of his voice, to Disney for eternity. So even if James Earl Jones is no longer there, they can just recreate his voice. They did the same thing with Mark Hamill in his appearance in the Book of Boba Fett. You hear a younger version of Mark Hamill. They used audio recordings of Mark Hamill reading audio books to generate new lines, because of course Mark Hamill is still around, but his voice doesn't sound like, the young Luke Skywalker that we see portrayed in the Book of Boba Fett. And so something tells me that this is a slippery slope. And so just the fact that such an epic science fiction series is now released on Blu-ray, and its creator has to learn about it from the media, is beyond me. I mean, he would probably volunteer to collaborate with that and oversee it. And I think it would actually even enhance the status of a re-release like that. Think of the Schneider cut of the Justice League. The fact that he got the opportunity to do a recut of his movie and he made it totally different, gave it his own stamp. For many people, that was a reason to go and buy that movie and to watch it. So I don't know why all these big companies don't want that. Maybe it's because they don't want to pay residuals or extra money. They just want to squeeze out every last drop. But for instance, Mike Straczynski said there are not going to be any audio commentaries. He recorded audio commentaries for so many episodes, and he continues to do that on his Patreon, by the way. They didn't integrate that because money, because it would be too complicated. And so we will get the series on Blu-ray, and it will be much better than what we currently have on DVD. But it still won't be the ultimate release. And kind of in an ideal world, I'm thinking, doesn't this series merit an ultimate release? Shouldn't these studios just invest, maybe not to make their money back, but just for the sake of art? This is also what I hope will happen one day, if ever Disney would re-release the original version of the original trilogy of Star Wars. I feel that history needs an official release of what the movie actually looked like when it was first released, not all these fixed versions later on. Of course, they may be for George Lucas the definitive version, but isn't it insane that you can never see what Star Wars looked like when I first watched it in movie theaters? This is happening everywhere. I saw a similar discussion about old video games, that a lot of the video games that I grew up with, you cannot play them anymore unless you play them kind of through emulators, which is kind of in a gray area because sometimes sometimes these games are abandoned, and so I don't think morally there's anything wrong about playing them in an emulator. But sometimes these games still are the the property of the big companies like Nintendo. A lot of the old games on Nintendo are now inaccessible. And it's up to Nintendo to re-release them and make some money on them, but sometimes it will never happen. And so, I think over time there's going to be a discussion about all this, and maybe this will lead to a whole different industry in the future. I can see a world where, now, especially now that you can create a lot of these special effects, and you can use extremely professional cameras for amateur prices. I can see a future where people will actually want to hold on to their intellectual property instead of selling out to these big companies. And I can see a future where individual creators will be able to gather so much support and maybe just do fundraising themselves, so that they can create stories where the big companies wouldn't see any opportunity to make money. And maybe there will be a future where individual creators will be able to actually pay actors what they deserve and pay writers what they deserve, instead of, this whole entire industry being in the grips of all these money-making factories that don't really care for the creators. I don't know. It's a radical change of the world in which we now live. But look at the creator industry that has emerged with the advent of podcasting and YouTube, and how you can now watch stuff on YouTube that actually looks better and has better storytelling than what you would see on regular TV. Things are changing. And I don't think that you can put the spirit back into the bottle.
Catholics rock!
It's time for a visit to the Peculiar Bunch. This is the place where you can ask anything you always wanted to know about Catholics, but you were afraid to ask.
Catholics can be a peculiar bunch. No meat on Friday.
Oh, meat? What do they eat? Light bulbs?
And today I want to react to something I read about a Protestant pastor who wrote a book about the Virgin Mary.
Man, you guys got more crazy rules than Blockbuster Video.
Now, I'm not telling you anything shocking if I say that the Virgin Mary is extremely important in the Catholic tradition, and has always been ever since the beginning, even before the split between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, and long before the Protestant Reform. The Virgin Mary has been a central figure in the iconography of the Church, so the depictions of the Mother of God, in the early doctrine of the Church, the early theology that started to emerge, and also in the devotional life of the Catholic Church. The Virgin Mary, being the mother of Christ, the Redeemer, at one point was designated to be the Mother of God, because, of course, her son, Jesus, is not only human, but is also fully God. And so technically you could say since she is the mother of Jesus, who is both God and both human, she is the mother of God. Now, that theology resulted in also a devotion, so into ritual practices in the Catholic Church and forms of prayer, in which the Virgin Mary is seen as someone who is so close to her Son that she is maybe your best friend in heaven. And I've always explained the Catholic view on why we pray to Mary as the Mother of God, that this is what we do in here on earth as well. If I am going through some tough times, I may ask other people to pray for me, and people ask me to pray for them. And so the only difference with our prayers to Mary or to the other saints is that they are in heaven, but we believe that they are in heaven, in the case of the Virgin Mary, body and soul, in the case of the saints, in the soul, awaiting still the resurrection of the flesh. But they are real, they are still alive, but they don't live here on earth. And so our prayers to the saints is not to replace our prayers to God or the prayers to Jesus, nor are the saints or the Virgin Mary competing with God. Let's see what works better if I ask Jesus or maybe I ask the mother of Jesus. No, you have to see this in this kind of family type of vision of what the church is. The church is not just an organization. It is a family of brothers and sisters, some of which live here on earth and some of which are already in heaven. And but we're still connected to them. This is what in Catholic theology we call the communion of the saints. This is also part of our creed. We believe in the communion of the saints. It means this invisible bond between the church here on earth and the church in heaven. And so we can help one another. And this is why the Virgin Mary was always venerated in the Catholic Church as someone who also is given to us as a mother to pray for us, just as she prayed in her existence here on earth for the mission of her Son and for the people around her. So there is this Protestant pastor and theologian here in the Netherlands who wrote a book about the figure of Mary, because for Protestants, this role of the Virgin Mary is very problematic, and this maybe has to do also with the kind of the excesses when it comes to in this Marian devotion. I don't think it is the Protestant Reform was anti-Virgin Mary per se. In fact, we know that Luther had a very strong devotion to the Virgin Mary, even though the Protestant Reform started with him. So the Virgin Mary, at least at first, in the beginning of this Protestant Revolution, was still, at least from a theological point of view, considered to be a very important saint. But there were also tendencies in the Catholic practice and in the devotional side, which is not always fully aware of all the theological implications of certain forms of devotion, went a little bit far, where it almost seemed as if the Virgin Mary was more important than Jesus. And so over time in the Protestant world, there was a growing reluctance to award the Virgin Mary this important place that Catholics continue to give her. And so it took until, I think, just 2 years ago for a Protestant theologian to write this book about why Protestants should attribute a greater place to the role of the Virgin Mary, not just in the Bible, but also in the ritual life of the Church. And of course, as you can imagine, this encountered a lot of resistance among his peers and fellow Protestants, and yet he's also convinced a lot of his readers that there is actually a lot of theological validity to restore the important role of the Virgin Mary in faith that she has always had, even in the early centuries of the Church. So the role of the Virgin Mary and the theology of the Virgin Mary is something that Protestants and Orthodox Christians and Catholic Christians all have in common. It's our common heritage, but it was just kind of set aside by our Protestant brothers and sisters, and gradually they're rediscovering this. So I read this interview because he's going to do a lecture here in the parish in September, I think, and so on that occasion, I read an interview with the author, and he said he was asked, so are there any limits to what you are comfortable with when it comes to this veneration of the Virgin Mary? And then he said, yeah, absolutely. I think I would never want to carry around a statue of the Virgin Mary in procession. I feel that is way too close to, that you really run the risk of turning her into a deity. And he also said, I will never light a candle to pray to the Virgin Mary. That feels like superstition. And I think when I'm reading that, it's like, oh, come on. You're a theologian. Look at this objectively. Is this really superstitious? If you look at what does this mean, we have so many saints and fathers of the church writing about these practices. When Catholics light a candle when they pray, it is not a sacrifice to enforce something. It's not a magical ritual that automatically grants prayers. Catholics don't believe that. The prayer is a symbolic expression of our prayer. So it's a ritualized form of in which just like we use words to express our prayer, we also use gestures. When we pray, we may fold our hands, or we may stretch out our hands to heaven. These are symbolic gestures. It's not a magic gesture. It's not superstition. It's just an expression of this of the movement of our soul. And so is lighting a candle. The candle itself, you put a light in the darkness, which is, of course, reminds us that we are asking for light, a guiding light in our life. It's not the candle that is that guiding light. No, it reminds us of the light that Christ is. We light a candle because the candle will continue to burn even after we've left the church or the chapel where we lit that candle. And so it's an expression of our will to be constantly in prayer for this desire, this prayer that we have to have longevity, that it doesn't only depends on our effort, but that we can confide in the fact that if we address our prayers to heaven, the saints and Jesus will take care of that prayer and will make sure that it's not forgotten. This is why those candles burn. And if I enter the church on Sunday morning and I see all these candles in front of the Virgin Mary, I don't think like, oh my gosh, all these superstitious people, why don't they just go pray straight to God? No, I see expressions of faith and surrender, and I see almost like traces of prayer. I think it's a beautiful symbol, and I don't see why that would be superstitious or why that wouldn't work for Protestants. Then again, I'm not a Protestant. I'm a Catholic priest, but yeah.
When did you become an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics?
Last night. The packet. The extraction theory papers. Am I the only one who did the reading?
I read a fun book. It's nothing special, but still a fun read. It's written by Mike Chen, and it's called We Could Be Heroes. And when I read the review on, I think I saw it in my feed on Goodreads. That's oftentimes how I discover new books. I see someone else who read the book, and then I was like, I may want to check that out. This book is about two people, a man and a woman, and they discover that they actually have superpowers. But the only caveat is they don't remember anything of who they were before they discovered these superpowers. So I think that's a very intriguing premise. So the first superhero that we encounter is this man, and he is robbing a bank. His superpower is not super strength or laser vision or whatever. No, his superpower is that he can remove memories from people's heads. So he can actually rob a bank, and then he can take the memory of that traumatic event for the people there, take it out of their heads and walk away, and nobody would follow him. The only problem is, of course, every bank has cameras, security cameras, and he can do nothing against that. So ultimately, he becomes known as this very mysterious bank robber that always walks into a bank, robs it, and leaves, and nobody does anything. And so there's this mystery around who is he? And he gives himself a persona of a superhero in the sense that he changes his voice and his accent, and he threatens that he can change people's heads and mess around with their memories, and if they don't do what he says, he can even take away very precious memories of, the birth of your child or the wedding of your daughter. And at one point, one of those bank robberies, something goes wrong. And then you discover that, wait a minute, behind this so-called superhero, there's actually a very vulnerable person. And then there's this other woman who comes across this man, and she too has superpowers, but she has more classic superpowers. So she's able to run super fast like the Flash. She's incredibly strong, but it's like Wolverine. She feels the pain, but she heals immediately. So she's able to break through walls. It hurts, but there are no lasting consequences for her. So these two people, by accident, meet each other. They don't know about their superpower or their secret superhero identity, but ultimately they're working together. They'll have to work together and try to unravel who they were before they got superpowers and why. And so I love the first part of the book. Like, first half of the book is really original and fun to read, and I could totally picture it as if I was watching a movie. And then the second half, it starts to drag on a little bit. The idea kind of outstays its welcome, and I was waiting for this big reveal. Like this, I was hoping that this story would go beyond just being a superhero story. And the beginning of the book felt very much like, there's going to be so much depth and personal development, and unfortunately, the second half of the book doesn't pay off what it seems to set up, and it turns into still an enjoyable story. It's got a good villain. It's got a good resolution. There are some lessons learned, but it's all very run-of-the-mill. And at the end, it was like, okay, okay. I like at the halfway point of the book, I wanted to give it 5 stars out of 5 because I was so enjoying the original premise of the book. And then after reading it, I was like, 4, maybe 3.5 out of 5. It's just a missed opportunity. I expected the book to be better. But if you read it without too many expectations, I still think you're going to have a great time. So it's called We Could Be Heroes, written by Mike Chen. Then I read a book about someone who actually defines himself almost as a superhero, but in reality, Rich Roll apparently also has a podcast. He's quite known on social media. I'd never heard of him. And he wrote a book, Finding Ultra. And it's a story of his life where, at least when he was 40, he lived a very unhealthy life as a couch potato. He had a drinking problem, so he needed to go to rehab. And he happened to be married to this extremely intense vegan wife who literally the fridge would be separated into half junk food, half celery sticks. And then he has this realization when he's 40 years old, after I think walking up the stairs to see his daughter, that if I continue like this, I'm not going to be at her wedding. And that flips a switch in his mind. He goes to talk with his wife and he says, whatever you do, I want to do it. And so she puts him on this, I don't know what to say about it. The nutritional advice in this book is wonky, to say the least. And a lot of it is outdated. But I can also see that it's better than the lifestyle that he had. But she puts him on this cleansing diet. And of course, a lot of that is hogwash. And there's a lot of science that debunks all this stuff. But anyway, he does it, and he goes for it like full energy. And then later on in the book, you discover that actually, as a young boy, as a teenager, he was a swimmer and he was an athlete. And it's only when he, between the age of 30 and 40 that he started to lose his edge and ultimately embark on a very dangerous lifestyle. But he kind of reconnects with that fervor that he had in his younger years, and he starts working relentlessly on becoming healthy, becoming stronger, and to challenge himself more and more. So he starts to run a marathon. He goes and climbs mountains. At one point, he is running ultra marathons. He's doing Ironman, not just one Ironman, but he does like 3 in a row and stuff like that. It's insane. When I was reading the book, I was thinking, you know what? There's actually a lot of similarity between the mindset that he had as an alcohol addict and the mindset that he now has as an athletic addict, he is addicted to these ultra experiences. And it's of course better than alcohol, but it's still, I felt that there was something missing in this book. Like there is this hunt for these extreme experiences, which of course we know chemically in your brain releases dopamine and all sorts of, does all sorts of stuff to make you feel great. But if you go overboard and you don't know your limitations, ultra sports can also be extremely damaging to your health. This is a hard lesson that I had to learn myself, and I talked about it earlier on in the show, and I said, I overtrained. This is why I cannot walk that walk of the world. I overtrained. I really was gung-ho that I wanted to run this sub 3.5 hour marathon later this year or next year. And so I was training 4 times a week. And every day I was going on at least an hour-long walk, and it was all with my feet. I didn't switch. If I had done this in a smarter way, I would have alternated between walking, running, but also biking. This is still kind of on my wish list. I want to get a racing bike. I do have a good general bike, but it's a touring bike. I want to get a genuine racing bike, especially now that I've seen that too much training the same muscles and always relying on my feet is actually causing damage. And then I don't reach my goals. In fact, I'm sabotaging myself. So I want to mix it up a little bit more. I also am considering getting some a trainer or something and start to do some more weightlifting and stuff, just to be able to mix it up and work on my general health and not just on my running speed. And ultimately, if I do this well, I may actually still run that very fast marathon, but not if I continue to just focus on running and walking. It is already has caused more damage than I expected. So this is what was totally missing in this book. Also, the other thing that annoyed me was that, especially in the later part of the book, he all of a sudden starts to tout this vegan regime, and it's so outdated. Everything that he says, I'm listening to that, and I was like, man, I used to think this, and I used to practice this 3 years ago when I was following the videos of this Dr. Berg. And at the time, I was like, oh, I need to be vegan. I need to be in constant ketosis. And now, mostly thanks to TikTok, I've come across a number of real doctors and scientists and they nutritionists, and they debunk a lot of that stuff that I just took for granted because the guy has a white coat. So it has to be true, right? I've become a little bit more skeptical and much better informed. I'm not saying that there are no benefits to a vegan lifestyle. In fact, I lived as a vegan for more than a year. I ran 2 marathons as a vegan. But it's not the only road to health. And so that is one of the reasons that I felt that the book was going a little bit overboard and should be taken with a grain of salt, even though too much salt is also bad for your health. Speaking of healthy eating, I cooked something really healthy, and I've been eating it for 2 days now. But it was more out of necessity than because I really wanted to eat this. But I had gotten a bag full of veggies. Nowadays, they used to be part of this Too Good To Go plan, but now they sell leftover vegetables in these paper bags that you can buy. And in the one that I was able to buy, there was this huge bag. It's like a family bag of endives. Endives are is a very popular type of vegetable in the Netherlands. We like the traditional way of eating it is in the wintertime. And so the endives are from the from kind of more like a lettuce type of family. So it's different from kale, for instance, or broccoli. So the way that we prepare this traditionally in the Netherlands is we make mashed potatoes, and then we add at the final stage, we add raw endives, and we mix it into the mashed potatoes, and we would also add bacon or something like that, and that's it. And eat it with gravy. It's a very much, I always associate it with winter, and that was the only recipe that I knew. So I got this huge family bag of endives, and the first thing I'm thinking is, I don't want to eat endives mash. It's summertime. There's got to be something else. And the problem with endives is they have a bit of a bitter taste if you cook them. And so if you mash them with potatoes, that kind of neutralizes that bitter aftertaste. But I didn't see myself eating this as a salad only, because then the bitter taste of endives becomes very prominent. And so I was looking for Asian recipes, and I've already turned around my entire view of spinach, because now I make Korean spinach, and it's so good. I love it. I used to hate spinach because I only knew the traditional recipes. And now I love Korean spinach. And so I found this recipe, very simple. So you need these endives. I had it was like 700, 800 grams, so a lot of it. You use a half a, what do you call it, like a red pepper, like the spicy ones. You cut that into tiny pieces. You dice up a red onion, maybe a clove of garlic. Also dice it up very small, or even crush it. And then this was interesting. A handful of tiny tomatoes, like these small tomatoes that I often use in the it's like, I'm not sure, we call them cherry tomatoes in the Netherlands. And I cut those in halves. You need a bit of cumin powder. You can also use coriander or coriander powder. I don't like coriander because I'm genetically dispositioned. To me, coriander tastes like soap. Half of mankind has that genetic defect, and for the rest of the world, coriander is fantastic. So I don't use coriander. You need some soy sauce, olive oil, and pepper and salt. So the way you prepare this is you put some olive oil, you add the diced red onion, the pepper, the garlic, and the tomatoes and the cumin powder, and you just fry that in the pan. And because you use the olive oil, especially the cumin powder and the onion and the garlic start to release their flavor, and it smells so good. Then you add 2 spoons of soy sauce, and immediately then afterwards you put in the endives, and you stir it, or you wok it until it starts to reduce a little bit. You don't want to overcook the endives because then it becomes all mushy and watery. So it still needs to have a little bit of a bite. So only, wok it for 2 minutes max. And then you add some more soy sauce, pepper and salt. I also added some onion powder, and you can basically add more herbs to enhance the taste. And I ate that in combination with white rice, or not white rice, I used brown rice this time. And it was delicious. It was so good and so different and super healthy, because endives, green leafy vegetables, are incredibly nutritious. They have got plenty of vitamins and iron and whatnot. So I'm no longer afraid of endives. Next time, I'm going to enjoy this. Now, here's a little bit of homework. Next week, I want to talk about the weirdest concoction that I've ever come across on the internet. But apparently this is a thing, and I've never heard of it. And I wonder if this is just a crazy recipe, or if this is something that you have actually tried out. It's called espresso tonic. I'm not making this up. Espresso tonic. Ice cubes, tonic, and then you pour a black espresso or a double espresso into that concoction, and you drink it cold. Really? I don't want to try it without knowing that I'm going to survive this. So please fill me in if you have any knowledge about this witchcraft and wizardry.
We are on the cutting edge of technology.
Wow. Well, what does that mean?
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device. And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build... Whoa.
Well, all your technology stuff, it just ends in disaster.
But there is one more thing.
So earlier in this episode, when we talked about Babylon 5 and the remaster for Blu-ray, I also mentioned upscaling. And this is something that especially modern TVs are very good at. So normally if you would take a low-resolution image and you just blow it up, it would get very pixelated. This is why a lot of those retro games have these very pixelated graphics. It's because the games when I was young were made for very low-resolution televisions. So in order to prevent the jaggies and the pixelated look, there are various ways in which you can kind of use the information around the pixels to come up with something that looks slightly better than just upscaling things. And nowadays with AI, the upscaling abilities of modern computers have gone even further than that. There are now video games that you can play on very modest hardware. For instance, I've got the Hogwarts Legacy game, and I'm playing it on a like 6-year-old graphics card. But the game has a IA assistant technology that uses the chip inside the graphics card to upscale it intelligently. And so even though the computer only has to work for, let's say, a 720p type of quality picture, the upscaling process is so smart that it actually generates new pixels and gives a sharpness that you could never reach if you were only blowing up the picture itself. So that this is upscaling, and this technology is very common in modern televisions, especially because a lot of the source material that we were watching is not 4K. A lot of our televisions, like the big screen televisions, are all 4K, but a lot of the streaming platforms like Netflix, they only serve you 1080p, unless you pay a lot of extra money, and then you can see 4K. So televisions do a pretty good job in upscaling old material and make it acceptable. This is why I was thinking of changing my Netflix subscription. And as I explained in previous episodes of The Break, I used to have a subscription through Apple, and I just had the standard Netflix subscription, which is 1080p. I've never felt that it wasn't sharp enough for my big 4K TV, so I was totally happy with that. But Netflix had been raising the monthly price for that, and it's now, I think, $12. It used to be $9.99, and if I look at the surrounding countries, it's much more expensive. I think it's because in the Netherlands there's a lot of competition, and so they have to keep the prices low. But in other countries, especially in the United States, it's insane how much you pay for a regular 1080p Netflix subscription. And so I'd heard that Netflix had nixed the basic subscription tier, where you pay only $7.99 or $6.99 even, Canadian dollars or US dollars, I'm not sure, and you would get like a 720p image. So that's basically a little bit sharper, slightly better than DVD quality, but almost the same. So definitely not the Blu-ray type of stuff that we're used to. But I was thinking, if my TV is so good at resizing, at rescaling, maybe it works. Maybe it's good enough. I just don't know, because I've got this very big TV. So the proof is going to be in the pudding. I just have to try it out. So I canceled my Apple subscription, and and just yesterday evening, I subscribed to the basic plan, which is only $7.99. And I started watching a movie, a television series on my TV, on my 4K TV. And at first I thought, oh, I made a mistake. this is still 1080p. This is 1080p. I couldn't believe that I was watching at 720p image. And then I watched another movie, and then I was watching this The Passengers sci-fi movie, which is, I still love that movie. Chris Pratt is playing a guy who wakes up too early on a big interstellar spaceship, and he's all alone. And the opening shot shows that spaceship through space, and you see it first of all in the distance, and that is when I started to notice some artifacts. So I saw that actually the image wasn't entirely smooth, and the closer the ship came, the more it was totally fine, but it wasn't that those early moments with the reveal of the ship that I noticed, this is actually a little bit lower quality. And then I walked towards the television, and I could tell, this is not entirely 1080p. But when I went back to my chair and I watched it from a regular viewing distance, I couldn't tell the difference. For me, it was like 95% the same image as what I was paying $12 a month for. So I intend on keeping my basic subscription, and boy, was I right in time, because just today I saw the news that Netflix has now also canceled the basic subscription plan in the UK and in the United States, which means they're going to cancel it everywhere. The only affordable subscription that you can get if you don't want to pay $12 or $15 a month for the standard subscription is to go with the advertisement option, where every hour you will see 5 advertisement breaks. I mean, that's already bad enough on YouTube. It's one of the reasons that I'm considering getting a YouTube premium subscription, because I hate those, even if it's very short videos, but man, they are annoying. Now, for me, it's a bit hypocritical for me to comment on that, because on YouTube, my revenue on YouTube comes from these advertisements. So every time you see an ad, please say a prayer for me, because this is helping me pay the rent. But I cannot imagine paying for Netflix and then having to watch advertisements. I mean, it's back to the Stone Age with that. So I have right now, I'm saving $4 a month, which is like $48 a year. And this is exactly the amount that I pay for my Sky Showtime subscription. So basically, by switching back to the basic tier, and they will let me keep it, even though they may not offer the tier in the future, but as long as I don't switch, I will probably be able to watch it for just $7.99 a month, and I get Star Trek for free. Yay! And with that, it's time to wrap things up. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time, and a special thank you to my wonderful patrons. And I want to welcome a new patron who joined the $2.50 tier monthly, and thereby also got access to the Discord server. And it's Gerby. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Gerby, welcome to the Patreon community. And of course, I'm still waiting for you if you're not a patron yet. It is a wonderful community, but more importantly, you help me continue my mission to make these programs and to reach out to people that otherwise would never, ever come across a priest in their lives. Sharing with them what's really important in life in the language of geeks and Lego and Star Wars. That's why I do what I do. That's my vocation. But I can't do it by myself. I can only do it thanks to your support. So thank you so much for your ongoing prayers, your advice, your feedback, your time, and also for your donations. We'll talk soon. Take care, and God bless.